Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Marty Ross. This is another webinar with conversation, or this is another Lyme Q&A webinar called Conversations with Marty Ross MD. Sorry to be getting to you a little bit late. My day ran a little bit long here clinically today, so but I intend on spending about an hour and a half here with you tonight. So, and that's if I don't tire out. We'll see how that goes. So I do see a number of new names here that are attending the webinar tonight. And so for those that are new, welcome here. And I also see a lot of familiar names, which means that people keep returning because they're getting some value, I believe. At least that's what I think. The way that you participate, if you're new to this, there's two ways. Number one, you can participate by just listening to the questions that people ask as well as the answers. That's one way. Second way, you can actually write questions to me, and you do that through the chat box that's over on the right-hand side of the screen. Yeah, that's the right-hand side of the screen. I'm right-left disoriented. But keep one thing in mind as you're doing that. One request I'll make is that when you write your questions, and when you hit the enter key, that's how you send it to me. But don't use the enter key to create multiple paragraphs, because what that does is it creates multiple questions that get hard for me to follow on my side, okay? During the webinar tonight, I will actually post the questions on your screen if you're participating in the live version. If you are listening to the recorded version, though, you won't see those. And so I read them so that you can participate at least in hearing what the questions are, okay? And then finally, tonight I am creating a recording as I do each week. And if everything goes as planned, and 99% of the time it does, we should have a recorded version that I will edit up later tonight. And then I will write a brief summary about what the webinar is and get that out in an email to you tomorrow morning, somewhere around 9:30 a.m. in the morning, okay? So take a look for that. When you get the email tomorrow, feel free to forward it to others that you think may get benefit from this. I want to share this information as widely as we can. Also in that email tomorrow morning will be the links that you can sign up to the next webinar, which is next week. And then after next week, I have a week off. I'm actually going back to Colorado Springs to help my 90-plus-year-old father move into assisted living. So I'll be off that week, okay? All right, so let's go ahead and get started here. Hello, Alex. Hi, Dr. Ross. My doctor is putting me on the following treatment plan for babesia. The plan is azithromycin 500 milligrams once a day, Malarone once a day. I asked for 2 times a day, but he said no due to being very toxic and bad side effects. Curcumin, liposomal glutathione, zinc, vitamin C and D. Is this a good treatment plan? Anything I should add or remove? Probiotic, perhaps. Can I have an occasional glass of wine? Thank you. So, I mean, ultimately, these are questions that you should work out with your healthcare provider. So, but I'll provide comments as I can. Okay, so first of all, when I put anyone on prescription antibiotic like the azithromycin, I do get concerned that we're going to knock down the good bacteria that line their intestines, and that is going to be a setup down the road potentially of causing too many intestinal yeast. I like to prevent too many intestinal yeast, and the reason I like to prevent too many intestinal yeast is if you get too mmany intestinal yeast, they trigger an inflammatory situation that looks just like Lyme does. In fact, Lyme, the main reason you feel bad when you have Lyme is your white blood cells, in trying to deal with Lyme, will manufacture a group of chemicals called cytokines. And those cytokines are good and bad. They turn the immune system on, but if the immune system has a hard time, it'll eventually make too many cytokines. And too many cytokines are what give you fatigue, brain fog, body pains, etc. Those things we call Lyme symptoms are really too many cytokine symptoms. And if you start getting too many yeast growing in your intestines, they also will trigger too many cytokines to be made. So I don't want to add to your cytokines. So I like to do things to prevent that from happening, okay? So a probiotic, I think whenever you're on antibiotics, is a good idea. In terms of, in terms of ones I like using these days, my preference these days is to do a combination of a what's known as a spore-forming or soil-based probiotic combined with strains that would be found in our intestines, or human strains, okay? So the spore-forming or soil-based probiotics, they form this spore, this kind of hard covering that makes it easy for them to get through the intestinal tract. I'm sorry, through the stomach acid and into the intestinal tract. These spore formers seem to support the good bacteria in your intestines to function better. Okay, they may even help the human strains of probiotics gain a foothold in your intestines better too. So there's research nutritionals recently came out with a product that is a combination of spore former and human strains. That's a product by research nutritionals called Multibiome, and it's one pill one time a day. It doesn't require refrigeration. That tends to be what I'm doing these days with people. In the past, before this Multibiome, I would have used a separate research nutritionals product called Probiotic, which is a spore-forming probiotic. And that would be 2 pills one time a day. And I would combine it with another product that had human strains in it called HMF Forte by a company called Genestra. And that would be 2 pills one time a day as well too. But this research nutritionals product, I like. It's actually having some good results. And so I've been very pleased with it. And it's not taking as many pills. It's 1 pill versus the old way would have been 2 of the Probiotic and 2 of the HMF. So it's a little bit of an easier process to do. Okay. The only other thing, I don't know your whole story here, but generally when I work with Malarone in my practice, I find better benefit doing 1 pill twice a day, not once a day. That's not to say that once a day won't work for you. So those are just my thoughts on that. Okay. All right. Thanks, Alex. Good luck to you. Hello, Jim. Let's see. Thanks so much for doing this. Do you think genetic testing is useful for Lyme patients? If so, in what ways do you find it useful? Also, do you think testing for omega-3-6 ratio is useful? If so, how is it useful? So on the omega-3, omega-6 fatty acid ratio, I don't do it in my practice. I'm not sure if it would be useful or not. I don't have a clinical experience doing that to say yes or no, okay? In terms of genetic testing in general for Lyme, I think there's a lot of problems with genetic testing. And I'll use an example of one test so that you understand more broadly what I'm talking about. So genetic testing just gives you the picture of what your coding is, your computer code, if you will. It's the signals or the messages that provide information about how our body is supposed to work, okay? Now, keep in mind that just because we're programmed a certain way does not mean we are going to manifest that problem, because there's other things that get in the way with whether we manifest a problem or not. So as an example of that, one of the tests that I've done in the past, and I'm not doing as much anymore because I just don't know that the genetics really magnify or actually show up as a real problem in people, is a genetic problem called MTHFR. So MTHFR, that stands for methyltetrahydrofolate reductase. It's an enzyme, okay? And that enzyme has a genetic code that tells it to be made correctly. Now, so when we do the MTHFR test, we're looking at the genetic code. And there are a couple defects that have been identified that could make it so that this enzyme is not manufactured correctly, and it will turn out deformed or malformed, and therefore it may not work correctly. So what does that enzyme do? Well, that enzyme is a key enzyme in the beginning of what is known as the methylation detox pathway. And the beginning of that methylation detox pathway requires taking folate from your diet and converting it into what I'll call activated folate. And the enzyme that activates that folate is the MTHFR, methyltetrahydrofolate reductase, okay? So presumably if the programming for it is wrong, it may turn out incorrect and not be able to cause you to make enough of this activated folate. Now, that activation of folate is the first step of a number of chemical reactions that do detox, leading ultimately downstream to the production of the big detox chemical that our body uses, which is called glutathione. All right. Now, where this gets tricky is what happens in our environment. And our environment it includes all of the bacteria and microbes that live in our intestines. And to give you an idea of the significance of this, about 90% of the genetic material that is found within our bodies comes from the microbes living in our intestinal tract. 90%, that's a lot, okay? And these germs are hanging out down there for some reason. And in return from hanging out down there, we feed them, we allow food to get to them, we take care of them, all right? Now, we're not benign. We're not just letting these germs hang out for a free ride. We're getting stuff from these germs, all right? So these microbes that live in our intestines, also known as the microbiome, do things. Number one, we know that they help aid in the digestion and breakdown of food, right? They can remove toxins. They release chemical messengers that modulate your brain function and whether you have depression or not. They release chemical messengers that modulate how your immune system works, all right? And it's very possible they could make up for the deficiencies of our genetic programming. They might. So for instance, if our bodies are not making enough of that activated folate because we have a blocked enzyme, the bacteria in our gut and germs in our gut may step in and manufacture them for us, all right? So having a genetic problem does not mean we manifest it because there are things in us, all these germs in us, that may have the ability to correct for those problems. So these days, for instance, when it comes to MTHFR testing, if somebody has had MTHFR testing done and it's abnormal, then my next step is to see, does it really manifest as a problem? And this is one of those things that we can actually do a test. And that is we can look to see, we can check a blood test for something called homocysteine. And if you're not making enough of the activated folate, your homocysteine levels will get high. All right. So more and more, I don't even do the MTHFR test. What I do is just get a homocysteine level. And if the homocysteine level is high, I'm going to correct for MTHFR, and I'm going to give somebody methylated folate, basically, and also a methylated B12. That's how I would do it. So to answer your question, I don't do genetic testing. I think for a lot of these genetic tests that we do, even though we may find evidence of this genetic problem and that genetic problem, it has nothing to do, though, with whether we manifest the problem. And for most of these genetic tests that are being done out there, we don't have chemical markers or metabolites in us that we can check to see, does the problem actually truly manifest? So I just don't do it. I know there's a number of my colleagues, there's one here in Seattle that's become a big proponent of it, and I don't know whether it's useful or not. We don't have ways of following whether it is or not. Okay? All right. Thanks for that question, Jim. Hello, S. Let's see. Is it true that fluconazole can be effective as a Borrelia Bartonella treatment? Is it okay to use fluconazole for 25 to 50 days without nystatin? What are the benefits and or side effects of adding nystatin? Would you treat yeast with fluconazole if yeast is what is creating leaky gut? Okay, so fluconazole, everyone, is in a family of antimicrobials which are called the azoles. And azoles include things like flagyl, metronidazole, something called tinidazole or Tintamax. And those two we know can be useful against treating the cyst form of Lyme. And fluconazole is in that same family. So you wonder, can it treat cyst? And it may. We don't have any studies proving it does or not. There was a physician a number of years ago named Chart out of the United Kingdom that came up with something called the Chart Protocol. And what Dr. Chart hypothesized is that fluconazole, if you used it for about 25 to 50 days, like you're talking about here, could be an inhibitor of detox within the Lyme germ. And then after you did it for about 50 days, then you would do a month of amoxicillin without the diflucan. And because the germs' detox mechanisms had been basically blocked out, then what would happen is the amoxicillin would have a better chance of working, okay? Maybe that's so or not. No one did any studies to prove that or not, okay? So could fluconazole help with Lyme? Maybe, okay? Could, and in two ways. One is either by impairing the detox mechanisms, or the second one is possibly killing cyst because it's in the same family as tinidazole, metronidazole. Recently, Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Ying Zhang's lab at Johns Hopkins, that lab is doing a lot of novel research, laboratory experiment research, not human research, but laboratory experiment research, looking to see what do we do about persister germs. And in one of their studies looking at Bartonella persisters, they discovered that clotrimazole, notice how it ends in azole, clotrimazole, fluconazole, right? It's in the same family. They discovered that clotrimazole can treat persister Bartonella. Now, they didn't test fluconazole in that study, all right? So maybe fluconazole treats persister Bartonella. I don't know. It might, because one other member of that family does, okay? So I think that's what it potentially could do. Now, can fluconazole treat yeast? Yeah. I usually, if I am going to use it to treat intestinal yeast overgrowth as part of trying to help with leaky gut syndrome, I'm going to want to treat for at least a month using it, and I like to combine it with nystatin. The reason I like to combine it with nystatin is I have found too many treatment failures if I don't use the two together. And I think that yeast do have the ability to learn resistance to fluconazole, and I find less of a chance clinically of that happening if I include nystatin with it at the same time. Okay? So let's see if I answered your question. I mean, it's okay to use it alone, but I would prefer you use it with nystatin. Or if I were treating a patient, I prefer using it with nystatin. Yeah, anyhow. And so yes, one of the major causes of leaky gut syndrome is too many yeast in the intestine. So it'd be good to address that as well too. Okay? All right. Thanks for that question. All right. I'm wondering, I don't have many questions here tonight, and I'm wondering if this webinar, even though I'm seeing it seems to be functioning, is it working on your end? So if some of you are still here, if you would write to me in the question section to say, yeah, it's still live, I'd appreciate that because I'll keep going. But if I don't have people here, I can't see answering these questions. Oh, it looks like somebody just said that we do have stuff. Okay, thank you. I got it. It looks like it's live. Thanks. All right, let's keep going here. Hello, Mike. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. In your opinion, is it safe for someone with a positive ANA titer of 1 to 160 to get the COVID-19 vaccine? Thanks. So briefly, yes, but let me try to break that down a little bit more. So many of you may know that I guess now it's an older article that I wrote when the COVID-19 vaccine first came out. One of the things that I was being asked is the COVID-19 vaccine safe to do? And at that time, the only data that we had was from some of the trials looking at the trials they did to get the drugs approved. And that looks safe, but there was no way of knowing how it would behave in somebody with Lyme disease, basically, because they didn't break out people with Lyme disease in their studies in terms of looking to see what happened specifically to people with Lyme, okay? So one of the things that I had said at that time is as you consider getting a vaccine, one of the things we know from other vaccines, like the flu vaccine, the pneumonia vaccine, the herpes vaccine, the herpes zoster vaccine, vaccines in general, is that when people have an autoimmune illness already, there is a slight increased chance that getting a vaccine may trigger a second autoimmune illness to develop, okay? And that's true, okay? But so you have a relative risk increase, it looks like, from all vaccines of about 1.2 to 1.3. Now, let me tell you what that means in real terms. Okay, so for instance, rheumatoid arthritis is known to occur in 1% of the US population. Okay, 1%. All right, so your chances of getting rheumatoid arthritis is low. It's 1%. All right. And now if you've got a relative risk of 1.2, that means that you take the risk in the population of 1% and you now take it times 1.2. And that changes your chances of getting rheumatoid arthritis after a vaccine to 1.2%. All right. So guess what? It's still small. Okay. So I just raised it more as an issue to explain that, yeah, it's possible, but I now would say keep in mind that any of these autoimmune illnesses are rare to begin with, and a relative risk of 1.2 to 1.3 means that for most of these you still have minuscule chance of getting them. Okay, and because of the risk of COVID and all the damage it can cause, I still think the risk of that could occur of anything bad happening from COVID is far less, such as an autoimmune such as this, compared to the damage that can happen if you get COVID and get harmed from it. Okay, I manage too many people in my practice that got COVID and they are still suffering. They're suffering months later. We're still struggling, trying to figure out, is it Lyme that it got activated or is this still post-COVID? Post-COVID's a messy thing. And we know from data that people can even have mild COVID and months down the road develop post-COVID syndrome that just leaves them in a bad situation. So my preference still is don't get COVID. And the best thing we know to prevent COVID is the vaccine. The vaccines work 95% of the, are 95% or more actually in the real world effective at preventing mild to severe illness. That's pretty efficacious. Okay. Now I know last week I was asked a question about whether I thought ivermectin would be useful to take regularly to prevent COVID. And what I will tell you is I looked at the data again this morning and it's spotty data. It's hard to say. It might help prevent some COVID, but the research that's been done looking at this is really some shoddy research. There's a lot of biases in how they were done. The measurements of outcomes weren't always good. And in one study I saw, which was done, I believe, out of India, the way they did the study is they took people that had COVID, they took household members and they put these household members into two different groups, and everyone wore protective gear. And in addition, some got ivermectin and some did not get ivermectin. The transmission rate in those that didn't get ivermectin was 10%. And for those that got ivermectin, it fell to 2%, meaning that you still had that the ivermectin group did 80% better at preventing illness than the non-ivermectin group. Okay, but that's just one very small study, which still means that even in that study, 20% of people on 20% of people that took ivermectin still got it. All right, so is it fair to say that ivermectin is going to work as well as the vaccine? No. In fact, that's one small study, and it may or may not work at all. We don't know. It's horrible studies that have been done in terms of the quality of the studies. So I still think in terms of preventing damage from COVID, your best option is the vaccine. And that's even with all the concerns out there that people have about autoimmune illness and the rare bad stories we hear of bad outcomes from COVID vaccine, because it could happen. The chances of a bad outcome from COVID and getting COVID is far greater than any chances of bad outcome from getting the COVID vaccine. Okay. All right. Thanks for the question, Mark. Good luck to you. Or Mike, good luck to you. Hello, Gail. Let's see, Dr. Ross. I read your webpage on neuropathy and what you recommend. I have a feeling of vibration or static in both of my legs and feet. It's horrible trying to fall asleep, and I even feel it when sitting. It's very upsetting. I can have sensitive bladder, so supplements can be hard. I have Lyme and Bart. I also am vegetarian, as I have high levels of H2S bacteria in my gut and possibly SIBO as well. So I have cut saturated animal fats out of the diet since 12/20. Wonder if low on B vitamins, which B vitamins would be most important to take, as B complex can irritate the bladder. Top supplement of your list. Is this a common symptom? All right. So when I see somebody that has a lot of vibration and buzzing like you've described, I tend to think more towards Bartonella, although Lyme may possibly do that. And yes, the symptoms you're describing very much fit with the neuropathy. Now, if you happen to be vegetarian and have removed red meat from your diet, you may be deficient in a nutrient called carnitine. And the other key nutrient you might be short of that influence nerve function is vitamin B12, all right? Not all Bs, but vitamin B12. Now, the way to see if you're deficient in B12 is get a blood test done. If your blood test looks pretty good, it may mean that you're getting enough B12 through other sources. It's kind of hard to do vegetarian, but you might still be getting it through other sources. And if you are low in B12, then what you can find are sublingual varieties, pills that you put under your tongue and you absorb that way, and you sometimes can get by without having all the irritation you were describing. The carnitine, which comes from red meat, carnitine is used by your energy factories called mitochondria as a transport vehicle to carry fat to the inside of the mitochondria. Inside mitochondria is where power is created for our cells. And you need to burn fat and sugar through chemical reactions to create that power. But that fat has to get in there, and what carries it is carnitine. So if you're not getting enough in your diet, you're not going to have enough fuel supply reaching your mitochondria to be burned, okay? So the way I like to replace that, especially in vegetarians, is to take something called acetyl L-carnitine. It seems to be more easily absorbed than other varieties. The product I like using for that is a product by Thorne called Carnitil. And I usually start people at 500 milligrams twice a day for a month, and then decrease it down to 1 pill a day after that. Okay, so if you're vegetarian, as I think you've said here, there are two things I would consider. Check your vitamin B12 level. If it looks good, great. If not, start supplementing by putting it under your tongue. I would get on some carnitine as well too. And then finally, as you know from reading my article about neuropathy, I talk about part of the repair process is to repair the double layer fat membrane of your mitochondria, the covering of the mitochondria, which can get injured in chronic infection, and also your nerve cell membranes that can get injured. And it just so happens that the way you repair the nerve cell membrane is the same thing you do to repair your mitochondria membrane, all right? So both of these membranes are made up of fatty acids. The mitochondria is primarily made up of phosphatidylcholine with a little bit of phosphatidylserine and some other ones. And then your nerve cell membranes are primarily made up of phosphatidylserine with a little bit of choline, all right? And so you want to do phospholipid repair. That's how we fix those. And using a product called ATP 360, 3 pills 1 time a day can be useful for that as well too. Now, keep in mind, if you happen to be a person that's taking something to treat babesia, meaning if you're taking specifically two things, which is either atovaquone, which is called Mepron, or atovaquone proquinel, which is a pill that has atovaquone and proquinel in it. That atovaquone is inhibited if you happen to be on CoQ10. And the ATP 360 has a little bit of CoQ10 in it. So if that's the case, instead of doing ATP 360 to do your phospholipid repair, what you would want to do is something called NT factor by Research Nutritionals. And that does not have any CoQ10 in it. And if you do that, you use it as 2 pills 3 times a day. And you do that for 2 months. And then you cut down to 1 pill 3 times a day after that. Okay. All right. So I think so let me do a quick screen share here. And good luck to you, Gail. All right. Okay, so this is my Lyme disease information site, Treat Lyme by Marty Ross MD. And in terms of the article that Gail was talking about for nerve repair, where you can read more about this, take a look in my brain and nerves section here. And here's my article on neuropathy repair, okay? All right, and I talk about carnitine, I talk about all those things in here, all right. And then in terms of what to use for phospholipid repair, so this is my supplement store. Anyone can buy from my supplement stores where my patients get their products. This is what I use with my patients. But these high quality products you can incorporate into your treatments too. If you were to choose to buy from here, know that these are things I find effective in my practice. So I screen out products for you to find out what does work. Number two, I cover any taxes you might have, and we provide free shipping as long as your order is over $50, okay? And we ship out of Austin, Texas, which means we reach most places of the country pretty quickly, all right? So anyhow, let me just show you in terms of the two products that I talked about. So one is called NT Factor. All right, so the NT Factor energy is this one right here. This is the ATP 360 I was talking about, okay? The key difference is ATP 360 has CoQ10, NT Factor does not have CoQ10, okay? All right. All right, good luck to you, Gail. Hello, Dave. Hello, David. Hello, Dr. Ross. I'm currently on prescription antibiotics for babesia and would like to know what probiotic would you recommend and proper dosage to take. Thanks. So I think I kind of answered this one earlier. Hold on just a minute here. So again, the probiotic, I'm tending to now work with probiotics or build probiotic regimens that incorporate spore-forming probiotics and also human strains of probiotics. And I did mention it earlier tonight, so if you want to hear more of the reasons why for that, and if you missed it, just listen to the recording tomorrow to the beginning. I think it was one of the first one or two questions I took. So again, the product I would recommend that incorporates both of those kinds would be the product by Research Nutritionals called Multibiome. It does not require refrigeration, and it's one pill one time a day. All right. Good luck to you, David. Hello, Kate. Hi, Dr. Ross. For your Lyme patients on low-dose naltrexone, which is LDN, everyone, and who have Hashimotos, have you found that their meds have needed decreasing? Also, do you think most Hashimoto's patients need T3 with their T4, or T4 only is okay? Thanks a lot. All right, so everyone, Hashimoto's is Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is an autoimmune illness where your immune system is triggered to attack your thyroid. And it causes the thyroid to not manufacture enough of the thyroid hormones, which are both T4 and T3. Now, keep in mind the way that your thyroid works. So it sits up here. It's making T4 and T3. About 90% of the thyroid it makes is T4. About 10% is T3. What is active in your tissues that gives you, sets your idle speed and sets your metabolism in your cells is all T3. So what happens is this T4 goes out through your body, gets into your blood, goes to some of the organs, and eventually is changed to T3, all right? And so what is active in your cells is T3. Right. Now, in terms of whether you need to supplement both T3 and T4, it all depends on the individual. Because most of that T4 is actually converted to T3, for many patients, just using T4 by itself will be enough, okay? People that I definitely want to get put on T3 are people that have a hard time converting their T4 to T3. And the way you figure out if you happen to be one of those people is to measure a blood test called reverse T3. And so what can happen is your T4 has two choices. It can either get converted to T3 or it can get converted to something called reverse T3. All right. It will develop more reverse T3 if your body's trying to go into hibernation to protect yourself. If it's trying to slow its metabolism way down, it's just going to kind of park this T4 over here as T3 so that it can't be converted into, so it's going to park it as reverse T3 so it can't get converted into T3. And reverse T3 has no activity. It doesn't do anything in the cells, okay? All right. Now, if you have high reverse T3, then that's a situation where I want to put people on both T4 and T3. That's how I tend to manage my practice, all right? Now, two ways to do T4, T3. You can either prescribe T4 and separately prescribe T3, or you could try desiccated thyroid, which is ground up thyroid gland from pork, in some cases beef. And that has a mixture of both T4 and T3 in it. However, it's got a little bit more T3 in it than what our thyroid glands normally make, because the animals, pork, I believe pigs, I think their T3 is a bit higher that they naturally make in their thyroid gland than what we make, okay? So just be aware of that, all right? Okay, then in terms of low-dose naltrexone, so low-dose naltrexone, everyone, is naltrexone. I'll talk about low-dose in a minute. Naltrexone is a chemical that we use to manage autoimmune illness and myalgia-type pain in people. But let me talk about why it's used, all right? So naltrexone is actually a narcotic blocker. And our bodies have its own natural narcotic system. They're made up of a group of chemicals called endorphins. So we have these narcotic endorphin receptors in our body, okay? Now, our endorphins actually have a couple functions. Number one, they manage pain, right? When they bind on these endorphin receptors, they help with pain. But the second thing that they can do is they also regulate the immune system. And they have the ability to actually regulate an immune system out of a state where it's attacking you. Okay. So the way that it works is if we provide a blockade of your endorphin receptors, your brain doesn't like that. And it starts sending out a bunch of signals to the endorphin producing cells in the body to make more endorphins. So you get a lot more endorphins made. Number two, these endorphin receptors that are blocked become much more sensitive to any endorphins that are out there. So when the blockade wears away, when the naltrexone wears off, then you've got a bunch of extra endorphins ready to flood these receptors, and these receptors are even more receptive to all those endorphins, okay? So that's how it works. Now, why is it low-dose naltrexone? Well, because it's manufactured as a 50 milligram pill. And if we gave you a 50 milligram pill, you would never have unblocking of the receptors. If you took 50 milligrams each day, those receptors would stay blocked permanently. We want it to wear off. And we find that a dose of about 1.5 to 4.5 milligrams is going to give us an adequate time of binding with a sufficient wear-off period. So usually, if you're using a 1.5 to 4.5 milligram pill, after about 4 to 6 hours, that blockade is going to wear away. Okay, all right. Now, because if you use low-dose naltrexone, it's very possible that your adrenal dysfunction will improve because you have less autoimmune illness. And therefore, over time, you may not need as much thyroid medicines. All right, so back to your question, okay? All right. So good luck to you, Kate. And then everyone, I'm going to show you an article you can look at that gives you the more details about low-dose naltrexone, how to use it, how long to use it. And so you want to take a look at my online Lyme guide. Take a look in this immune system section. And here is my article on low-dose naltrexone, okay? All right, good luck to you. Hello, Jesse. Hi, Dr. Ross. Have you heard of DesBio? Yes, I have. What do you think of their protocol for Lyme and co-infections? Also, what do you think of the Cowden Protocol? Also, have you noticed interference fields preventing patients from recovering their health? I've had my wisdom teeth removed, and I'm wondering if I would be beneficial for me to see if I need cavitations done in the future. Thank you. All right. So first of all, I haven't worked with DesBio enough to know if it does work. As I've looked at their products before, I tend to find that they tend to be more homeopathic, meaning energetic, than they are necessarily biochemically active formulas. And I just honestly don't know if it works. So the idea behind homeopathy is if we give you something, if we were to give that thing to you at a high dose, it would cause your problems. But if we give it to you at a super diluted dose, in fact, so dilute that the pills we give you don't even have the original molecules in it anymore, what's left is the energetic imprint. It can have a reverse healing effect. Okay, that's the idea behind homeopathy. And as I've looked at DesBio before, I think the majority of their products would be more in the homeopathy camp. Okay. In terms of the Cowden Protocol, I think there are parts of the Cowden Protocol that are good. I think in general, there are better protocols out there. So for instance, I have the Ross Lyme Support Protocol. I can show you that. You can take a look at it. There is also Puner Herbs that has a variety of herbs that he recommends. Puner is an herbalist to treat various infections, okay? The Cowden Protocol, the best parts of it are the cemento and the otoba, or the cat's claw and otoba, which is banderol cemento. I do not find that the idea that they use of rotating every 2 months a different set of herbal antibiotics in is that helpful. And I don't find things like the Kumanda and some of the other ones that he says kill Lyme actually work that well. I think your main good Lyme killers are the otoba and the cat's claw. There are a couple major glaring holes in the Cowden Protocol, and that is none of the herbal antibiotics in the protocol do anything for Babesia. In addition, although Cowden includes Houtennia, which can be beneficial against Bartonella, by itself, it probably is not that effective. And Cowden does not include another Bartonella-specific herb in his mix, basically, okay? So I think from a Lyme standpoint, it can be helpful. The last point I would make about Cowden is in terms of what we know from science, only one of the herbs that are in there has anything to do with persister forms of Bartonella and persister forms of Lyme. And that is cat's claw, according to research out of Johns Hopkins University, out of Ying Zhang's lab. We now know that cat's claw may be able to treat growing Lyme and persister forms of Lyme. But we do not know from herbal medicine research, or actually none of the other herbs in the Cowden Protocol have been shown to do anything for persisters. So when I have somebody that wants to try to do Cowden, I try to ask them to not do the rotations, but rather stay on all parts except stay on otoba and cat's claw. Number two, I tell them to add specifically Houtennia in and don't rotate it out. And when they add Houtennia in, I ask them to also find Sida Okuda, which is not in the Cowden Protocol, but it beefs up the treatment. I also try to figure out clinically, if they have Babesia, then I try to add in to the Cowden Protocol something called Cryptolepis. All right. Finally, these days, I've been trying to also add oregano oil, liposomal oregano oil, that is, or liposomal oregano cinnamon clove oil, and have people take capsules of that twice a day. The reason I'm doing that is Johns Hopkins University, Dr. Ying Zhang's lab, has shown us that those oils are useful against persister state of Bartonella and persister state of Lyme, which I think Cowden is weak on as well too. All right. So those are my thoughts. I think you'd do better taking a look at the Ross Protocol. But if you want to do an all-in-one, easy to do because somebody else lays it all out for you, Cowden could work, but it needs to be augmented in some ways. Okay. And then in terms of electromagnetic fields or interference fields, for some people they do. I think the majority of people have no problem at all, to be honest with you, okay? And then in terms of cavitation, so cavitations, everyone, are little cavities that are found under the roots of your teeth. They may serve as a place that Lyme can be harbored and exist and still keep giving you problems. They tend to occur more in people that have had some kind of work done to their teeth, like root canals. And the best way to find out if you have cavitations would be to find a dentist, a biologic dentist that has special x-ray equipment they can do to see if you have cavitations, all right? If you do, then one of the ways they can be treated is either you can have ozone injections in them, or you can have your teeth pulled, basically, okay? Anyhow. All right. Thanks, Julia. Hello, Lel. Let's see. What is your advice regarding severe pain that curcumin doesn't stop? So I'm sorry, but I'm not going to be able to answer it too well because I need to know more where your pain is. So, for instance, if it's neck pain and that neck pain is associated with a lot of neurologic symptoms, I might say get an MRI of your neck. Make sure you don't have pinching of the nerves. So anyhow, I need to know more about the nature of your pain. But a few points. Number one, if you've tried curcumin and your myalgia muscular pain doesn't get better, then you might want to also consider adding some magnesium. I usually like working with either magnesium citrate or magnesium malate or something that's a combination product of both. And the way to do that, you'd want to take about 600 milligrams at night. If the quality of your pain also is neurologic pain, and neurologic pain would have qualities of sharp, stabbing, shooting, burning, piercing, or electric, then you might want to take something that changes the transmission of that nerve pain. And the herb I like to do that is something called L-theanine. L-theanine is converted in the brain into a chemical called GABA. And GABA has its own set of brain receptors called GABA benzodiazepine receptors. And if you put more GABA on a GABA benzodiazepine receptor, that can change nerve pain transmission as well, too. The other thing you can do if curcumin doesn't stop your joint pain, muscle pains well enough is, first of all, try to increase it to 1,000 milligrams 3 times a day. If that doesn't work well enough, then sometimes adding glutathione can be helpful. And that's liposomal glutathione. So glutathione that's microscopically wrapped in fat to increase absorption. The reason you would want to do that is a lot of the pain that can occur for people in Lyme, one big cause is these excess cytokines I talked about earlier. So your immune system over-responding, all right? So curcumin gets inside of your white blood cells and blocks the cytokine production line, all right? It interrupts the manufacturing process. What glutathione does is a very strong antioxidant that lowers oxidizing agent signals that tell your white blood cells to make cytokines. So you get, you're trying to, by doing both glutathione and by doing curcumin, you're interfering in 2 different ways, 2 different mechanisms with how your cytokines get produced, okay? All right. And then finally, if all that doesn't work, you might want to start talking to your physicians about different medicines we use to manage pain, ranging from antidepressant medicines, anti-seizure medicines, all the way up to narcotics if need be. Although these days we try to shy away from doing them because of all the addiction problem, okay? All right. One last thing. You should also be aware that both CBD oil and medical marijuana, THC, can also be useful against pain too. Okay? All right. Good luck to you. And actually, let me just show you an article where you can look at all this. One last thing. I am going to show you the article, but one other thing. So the what was I going to say? I think I just blanked on what I was going to say. So let me show you an article I have written about pain. Oh, I know I was going to tell you. So one of the key parts of pain is to get sleep. Sleep always improves pain if you can get it, okay? So in terms of an article where I outline all the various ways you're going to approach pain and Lyme, take a look at this article called Lyme Disease Pain Treatment. Okay, and here I talk about the first step I have is sleep. I talk about some other options for you here as well too, okay? All right. All right. Good luck to you, Ellen. All right, let's see here. Hello, Marshall. Let's see. Hello, Dr. Ross, and thank you for doing this series. You're welcome. I am just completing a 6-week course of doxycycline for Lyme, diagnosed through clinical symptoms and a bullseye rash, with no symptoms for the past 4 weeks. Should I now get a Western blot test as suggested by an urgent care clinic to confirm, or will the antibiotics have wiped out all trace of the Lyme? And do you recommend prophylactically going on herbal treatments now to eliminate the possibility of chronic Lyme? All right. So it's a very good question. So first of all, if you had a bullseye rash after a tick bite, now I'm trying to remember, you haven't told me whether you know you had a tick bite. In other words, a bullseye rash happens in tick bites, but did you see a tick attached? Okay. So if you have a tick attached and you develop a bullseye rash after that, that's diagnostic for Lyme. There's no benefit in getting antibody testing at all. Okay. Right. So, and then the other thing is if you are well and you get a Lyme test and it is positive, it's going to stay positive for a long time anyhow, even if you got Lyme out. So the way that the Western blot or the Lyme testing you're doing is looking to see has your immune system made antibodies. And when you get an acute Lyme infection, somewhere around 2 weeks to a month after you get that infection, you'll develop antibodies, and they're going to remain around for a bit, okay? And that's because that's the way our immune systems work. When the germ is gone, we just don't stop having antibodies. So if you were to be done and get a Western blot or some other form of a Lyme test and it's still positive, that's okay because we expect it to still be positive. All right. That's my opinion on that. Okay. So in these situations, I try to judge how a person is doing. And in my opinion, I want to have somebody well in an acute Lyme situation like this for at least a month before I stop antibiotics. And in that kind of situation, I rarely see that anyone goes on to develop chronic Lyme problems. Rare. Okay. All right. Now, what do we really know? So we know that at the time when the Infectious Disease Society of America was recommending 3 weeks of antibiotics, what we were seeing in situations like this is about 15 to 20% of people would go on and develop chronic Lyme, meaning with 3 weeks of antibiotics, probably 80 to 85% of people are cured. All right. So for that reason, many of us advocate the 6 weeks of antibiotics that you just had. And in general, the majority of us that treat Lyme rarely see that anyone goes on to develop chronic problems. So in my situation, when I treat somebody as in the situation you're in, generally, I'm not going to do retesting. There's no point in it. You already have a diagnosis of Lyme based on the bullseye rash and your symptoms, okay? There isn't any benefit in going back and retesting. The test isn't going to tell you whether you need to keep treating or not. We make the decision to keep treating based on your symptoms. And what I usually do is I want somebody symptom-free for 1 month. You've already met that. So, and then to answer the second part of your question, do you need to do something else to keep treating? Herbal antibiotics? I don't think so. You're symptom-free for a month. Okay? All right. Good luck to you, Marshall. Hello, Kate. Let's see. Do you find any patients who are allergic or sensitive to herbs? I've been taking herbs for the past year, and ever since I've had mild eustachian tube dysfunction. My IgE is also elevated. Range is under 112. Mine was over 400. Thanks. So yeah, I mean, it's possible for anyone to become allergic to anything, to be honest with you. And which one of these would be causing you a problem is hard to say. The only way you could probably ascertain that would be to take the ones you're on and, under the direction of your physician, stop one. Over the course of a couple of weeks, see, does the eustachian tube get better? If it doesn't, add it back in and stop another one. So in other words, you have to kind of do by trial and error to figure out which one might be aggravating you, okay? Thanks for the question, Kate. Hello, Charles. Hi, Dr. Ross. How long can you continue Candida treatment? Is oral thrush, which I have, a correlation to what is going on in the intestines? So in my experience, if somebody's got oral thrush, 99% of the time it means they have intestinal thrush too. That's my experience, okay? So yeah, it's a clue. And so if you've got it orally, then I want to ask questions, figure out, do you have it intestinally? So do you have a lot of sugar cravings? Would be one. If you do, probably you've got it intestinally. In addition, do you have a lot of intestinal gasiness and bloating? Do you have rectal itching? Are you having difficulty swallowing? So is it more than just oral? Is it down here in your food pipe, which would give you difficulty swallowing? The other thing can happen if you have too many yeast is a lot of people will develop pimples and acne. And the reason they do, we think, is that the yeast in the intestines, when they grow too much, release toxins. Those toxins get absorbed into your bloodstream and interact with your skin, giving you pimples and acne, okay? So, look at all those questions and see, do you have some of those, all right? And if you do, then yeah, you might have intestinal yeast as well too, okay? In terms of how long can you continue Candida treatment, depends on which agents you're using. And how you're doing. But I've had people on them for a few months or longer sometimes, because that's what it took to get their Candida under control. There's no defined test that has proven what is the actual length of time, or there's been no studies done, I should say, that tells us what is the ideal length of time that it takes to clear intestinal yeast overgrowth. For most people, it's anywhere from about 30 to 60 days. There are some people, it can be months. I've had people that have taken months to get them cleared. All right. Thanks for your question, Charles. Hello, S. Don't the azoles treat spirochetes as well? What are the side effects, contraindications of Nystatin? So, it's a good question. The truth is, I don't know. Most of us have postulated they probably work on cyst, but there's not adequate data to say for sure whether they do or do not work on spirochetes. So it's possible. Let's see. What are the side contraindications of Nystatin? So Nystatin stays in the intestinal tract. It does not appear to be systemically absorbed. And so you don't have to worry about liver or kidney problems, for instance, okay? In the intestines, there's an occasional person that will have some intolerance to it. Often nausea would be one of the things that can happen with it. The other thing that I see rarely is some people have allergic reactions to it. That's rare, okay? Those are the two primary things I see. Good luck to you. Meg wrote, that shirt is great, with an exclamation point. Thanks, Meg. This is my skull shirt, everyone. And I know it is not my Halloween shirt. I wear it outside of Halloween time. But skulls to me actually represent rebirth. So if you die and you have a skull, out of that comes rebirth. And so I look at it as new beginnings, actually. So that's why I like wearing my skull shirt. But anyhow, thank you for that. Let's see. Thank you for your, let's see here. Hello, Athena. Let's see. Thank you for your efforts. It's live. Oh, that's from when I was asking the question earlier. Yeah, for all of you that said when you responded when I asked, is this really working? Thank you. I appreciate that. Let me get rid of some of these here. The reason I asked that, I've had this occur before where I thought something looked odd, like I wasn't getting enough new people showing up. And I discovered later that the whole webinar didn't work. I sat here talking to the computer for an hour and a half by myself, answering the questions that had been previously posted, but nothing got recorded because the webinar had actually shut down and everyone had been locked out of it anyhow. So I wanted to make sure before I spent an hour and a half talking to myself that I was doing it for good reasons, all right? All right, here we are. Gail, I see you reposted your question. I did answer that earlier. All right, let's see here. Hello, Marg. Marge or Marg? I'm not sure how you say that, so I apologize if I hope it's either one of those two ways, all right? Hi, Dr. Ross. Can too much yeast cause blood clotting? I've been told that yeast can cause narrowing of the blood vessels. I've never seen such a thing described. I haven't seen it explained that way in the literature. It is not clear to me how it would lead to clogging of your blood vessels, so I'm doubtful, okay? Thank you for that question. Good luck. Hello, Paulina. Let's see. My daughter developed erythema 2 weeks after a tick bite and was diagnosed with congenital Lyme disease because her BISE results are negative on both IgM and IgG part of the blood test. So the doctor thinks she got Lyme either from me or not now, but a year ago, when indeed she was bitten by a tick. I wonder what your thoughts are on this. Other doctor thinks she has a new active infection because she has positive IgM and negative IgG. She also has Bartonella, no specific symptoms yet other than the erythema. Okay. So in terms of how to interpret that the VISE, I'm not sure. I'm not sure what that indicates, yes or no. What I will tell you is that regarding IgM antibodies and IgG antibodies, in Lyme, it gets confusing. So whenever you develop any kind of an infection, whether it's Lyme or Bartonella or cold virus or COVID-19, the first antibodies that your immune system makes all fall in the family of IgM antibodies. So generally, we recognize IgMs as the acute antibody, okay? And we expect in all infections that it will go away and eventually get replaced by IgG antibodies. Once you make IgGs, they serve as your immunity. They serve as the memory of the immune system, okay? And they may or may not go away even when the infection is gone. So finding IgG, if it's positive, only says you had the infection in you. There's no way of looking at an IgG and knowing for sure if it's in or out of you now, right? Now, Lyme disease and Bartonella, apparently, I just heard a webinar last night that showed data that this happens in Bartonella too. We've known for some time that in Lyme, IgMs remain positive, even though they're not supposed to. And now there's some evidence that got presented last night. I was in a webinar on Bartonella showing that Bartonella IgMs often will remain positive too. And to be honest, we don't know why. So what we do know on the Lyme side is that based on the treatment trials that were done at the NIH over a decade ago now, for people to enroll in the treatment trials to see if long-term treatment worked, they had to do IgMs and IgGs. And all that data was never published. It was still out there. And we can tell by looking at it that of the people that had chronic Lyme, 40 to 50% were still making IgMs a year or more down the road. That's based on NIH data, okay? And we don't know why. Now, many doctors, because they don't understand that this is what happens in Lyme, want to automatically call the IgM a false positive. In addition, many doctors want to say IgM always means an acute infection in Lyme, but the truth is not necessarily. IgM may mean that you've got an old infection, all right? And so in your daughter's situation, having a positive IgM could mean she got it recently. It may mean that this is from a year ago. It could be, okay? And then, and again, as I mentioned here, if you were to get Bartonella antibody results and the Bartonella antibodies were positive and their IgM, that appears to happen even with old infection now too, all right? That's newer data that came out. It's an interesting finding, actually. Actually, this webinar was on how to do something called immunoblot testing that was hosted by IGeneX last night. And Dr. Burrascano presented information showing that IgMs can actually remain positive in Bartonella too. It's pretty striking, actually. All right. All right. Thank you, Paulina. Appreciate that question. Good luck to you. Good luck to your daughter, actually. Hello, Athena. Do you test most COVID long haulers for mold toxicity? So, good question. I mean, so COVID long haul has a variety of symptoms that can be associated with it. One of the big ones is fatigue, sometimes neurocognitive dysfunction, sometimes body pain, stuff that looks a lot like Lyme. I mean, it looks a lot like chronic fatigue syndrome. It looks a lot like a mast cell activation, and looks a lot like POTS, and looks like all of those things, okay? So my approach when I'm working with somebody that has post-COVID is to look for the same, to recognize that, yeah, it could be COVID, and there's some things we can do for that specifically, like Ivermectin, if they haven't been on any and it's still near the time of when they had their acute infection, I might try Ivermectin with them, for instance. But I'm also, if they're not getting better, I'm going to want to look to see, is there something else going on? And so I will look at times to see if they have mold toxicity. I will look at times to see, did they get reactivation of Lyme or Bartonella or Babesia? I might do some ELISpot testing to see, which looks to see, are your T white blood cells reacting? If your T white blood cells are reacting, it means they have seen those germs active within the last 2 months. Okay, it's not 100% reliable, but it gives you a clue. Okay, all right, so I might do that. But yeah, I'll look to see if there are other problems that could be related. Okay, thanks for your question. Hello, Marge. I believe Marge. Again, let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. I'm currently on yeast and mold treatment. Would it be a bad time to get the COVID vaccine? Should I wait to get the vaccine until I'm finished the mold treatment? So, Marge, I don't know enough about your health. I don't know what kind of shape you're in. If you are generally at my practice, if I've got somebody that I have on a mold and yeast treatment and they're stable, we've got them on the treatment, they're no longer worsening from being on the treatment, I usually recommend in those situations that they follow through and get the COVID vaccine. Mainly because, again, as I explained earlier, you've got greater risk of harm from getting COVID than you do from the vaccine itself, okay? So anyhow, but I would need to ask for your specific situation, I would need to ask you more what's going on with you. But in general, if I've got somebody on a treatment, they're stable, still symptomatic, but they're not declining as many people do when we put them on these treatments, I'll go forward with them to actually get the COVID vaccine done. Okay. All right. Thanks for the question. Hello, Mike. Let's see. Can biocide and LSF be taken while taking disulfiram? I see it lists ethanol and the non-medicinal ingredients. Thanks for doing this. So, that's a tough one. It has ethanol in it. And as you know, disulfiram blocks mixing alcohol with disulfiram is not good. Okay. In fact, remember, we use disulfiram to treat alcoholics. And the reason is disulfiram blocks one of the breakdown products of alcohol from being destroyed. So there's something called acetaldehyde. So alcohol is turned into a chemical called acetaldehyde, and disulfiram blocks the enzyme that breaks down acetaldehyde. And if it builds up to too great of a degree, you can get headaches, but you can also get severe abdominal pain. And so even small amounts of alcohol can do it, and like the small amounts that are in the biocide and LSF. It's not that I wouldn't necessarily recommend it, to be honest with you. Okay. All right. And actually, I had looked at this before. So it's not, there's some literature that suggests that you can boil or steam off the alcohol. So if you were to take like alcohol tinctures, alcohol drops, like cat's claw that's extracted in alcohol, and you were to put those drops in water that has been boiled, the alcohol will mostly steam off. And I used to think it all steamed off. Well, there's probably about 40% that is still left there. So it's markedly reduced, but there's still a little bit. So I shy away from doing anything that has any amount of alcohol in it at all when people are on disulfiram, because I've seen some bad outcomes from that too. Okay, so I'd be careful. Good luck to you, Mike. Hello, Christina. See, I believe I'm near the end of my Lyme and Bart journey. I hope most symptoms are gone for the last week. When should I come off of the Lyme and Bart herbs? When or how much time before it is likely in remission? What should I be watching for if it should come back? Thank you. All right. So the general rule of thumb I use about when to stop treatment is I like to have my patients either 100% symptom-free for 2 months before I stop treating. And I think that's your category, okay? The other situation that I will sometimes do is if I can't get somebody 100% well, I try to get them as good as I can, and I keep trying all kinds of adjustments in their treatment. But if I get them to the place that they're not 100% well, but they're at a pretty good place for at least 4 months, in that situation, I will also decide to stop treatment as well too. Okay, so either 100% well for 2 months, or at a better place and there isn't anything you can do to move the treatment forward for at least 2 months. Okay, I'm sorry, 4 months. 4 months. Okay, so 2 months completely well, or at a plateau for 4 months. That's usually when I'll stop. Now, in terms of your germs, if it's too early to stop, there's a different time frame in which they get active again. So Bartonella, because it replicates every 24 hours, you'll often start getting symptoms back within about 1 to 3 weeks. Pretty quick, okay? Lyme, on the other hand, replicates really slowly, maybe every 4 weeks to every 8 weeks. And when you stop treating and you've got it under control, but there's still a little bit left, it may take about 8 weeks or so before you start seeing symptoms from it again. Okay, so those are some guidelines to look out for. Okay, all right. Good luck to you. Thanks for that question, Christine. Hello, Suzanne. Let's see. Hi, Dr. Ross. A friend of mine was diagnosed with Borrelia myomoti. Maybe she also has Bartonella. The serology was negative, but the VEGF was very high. She has been treated with disulfiram for a few months and has improved a lot concerning her ability to walk, as she had been bedridden before. But on the other hand, she is much more in pain now than ever before, neck, back, hips, and feet. She started today on methylene blue, rifampicin. Any idea on the increasing pain level? Thanks. I would need to know more about the quality of that pain. disulfiram can lead to neuropathy, and neuropathy sometimes can cause nerve pain. Nerve pain would have qualities of sharp stabbing, shooting, burning, piercing, boring, grinding kind of pain versus muscle pains that we would see as part of Lyme and Bartonella often are going to be more achy kind of pains, all right? So if she's developing more pain and it is of a neurologic nature, it's the disulfiram. And you should have her discuss that with her physician. It's one of those situations that if it was my patient, I usually pull them off. Sometimes that neurologic injury that happens from disulfiram, if that's what this is. Remember I said if, because I can't, you're talking about a friend. I don't know enough situation what's happening with your friend. But I am seeing that sometimes the neuropathy that occurs from disulfiram becomes permanent in about 1 or 2% of people. So I try to be really careful about that, okay? All right. Good luck to your friend. Thanks for that question, Suzanne. Hello, Patricia. Have you heard of cell core supplements for killing parasites in Lyme? Also, is there a specific test you recommend to test for parasites? So I have heard of cell core. I have only looked at them briefly. I don't know whether they are effective or not, to be honest with you. Okay. Is there a specific test you recommend to test for parasites? So first of all, other than Babesia, which is a blood parasite, I don't believe that we have systemic parasites. I know there is the current trend and all those people on the boards out there that you're talking to, everyone is buzzing about, it's parasites, the reason you're not getting better. I disagree. There is no data to suggest that there are systemic parasites in people. There just isn't, okay? Now, other than Babesia is a blood parasite that can happen in Lyme. Now, it is possible to get intestinal parasites. A lot of people can have that. In terms of intestinal parasites, I usually like to make sure I get a good stool analysis. You can do that through a regular lab. You can get stool for ova and parasites, but good lab technicians will miss these frequently because they don't know what they're looking for. So generally, if I'm going to look to do a testing for it, I want to use a lab that specializes in parasites in the stool, and that's Genova Diagnostics. That's where I would send stool samples to see if there's parasites. Okay? All right. Thanks for the question, Patricia. So second part to your question, should you kill parasites? I just don't agree. I mean, this is an idea that was started by Dr. Klinghardt out here. And, you know, Dr. Klinghart's brilliant, but sometimes he's crazy brilliant and sometimes he's super brilliant. This is one of his crazy ideas. I just solidly do not see it. I don't think that parasites is the thing that's holding everyone back. I really don't, nor do I think it's a significant part of Lyme other than possible intestinal parasites that people get from time to time, okay? So I just flat out disagree. There is not adequate evidence to support any role of parasites other than Babesia being a part of this problem, okay? All right, thanks for that question. Hello, Charles. Let's see. Are peptides such as thymosin alpha-1 and BPC-157 useful for getting rid of chronic immune dysfunction and infections? Or is this just another fad that I won't need? So, you know, peptides is a new fad, which has some science behind it. I still think the jury is out as to whether people with Lyme will get benefit from it. I do think there's enough science to say that they may, but it's super expensive. And we don't have any decent studies that show that they work. I've had numbers of my patients that have gone through peptide therapy with other practitioners that spent thousands of dollars and got nowhere. So I don't know. It may or may not. I think the jury's still out on this one. Okay. All right. Thanks for that question, Charles. Hello, Thomas. Let's see, does disulfiram slow down wound healing or affected by anesthesia? I have foot surgery scheduled, and I don't know if I can have the surgery while on the medication. Is it not recommended if you still have a fair amount of yeast due to acetaldehyde? What is the dosing calculation in common disulfiram duration for a 120-pound female? Okay, so first of all, about acetaldehyde. In my practice, what I do for my patients that I'm about ready to put on disulfiram is I want to clear yeast first if they have any, if I suspect at all that they might have too many yeast in their intestines. And the reason is yeast manufactures acetaldehyde, like you suggest. Keep in mind, alcohol's breakdown product is acetaldehyde, and disulfiram prevents the breakdown of acetaldehyde. That's why you can get sick on disulfiram. So I would agree with getting the yeast taken care of. Okay. In terms of dosing, basically, the dosing is figured out based on your weight in kilograms, and you take target dose for a person is 4 to 5 milligrams per kilogram a day. Okay, so in your situation, the way you figure out what your weight is in kilograms is you take your weight, 120 pounds, and you divide it by 2.2. And that equals you're roughly a 54.5 kilogram person. Okay, so roughly 55 kilograms. Right, so then 55 times 4 milligrams a kilogram a day is 220 milligrams. And 55 times 5 milligrams per kilogram is 275 milligrams. And the pill that comes closest in that range is 250 milligrams. So I would target you at about, if you were my patient, I would target you at 250 milligrams. That's where I would try to work up to. Okay. Now, regarding your disulfiram and the anesthesia, I would need to know what anesthesia they're going to use. I don't know. I would have to know more about what's the method of anesthesia they're planning, and then investigate as to whether there's an interaction with disulfiram or not. So I can't say based on your question here. Okay. All right. Good luck to you. Hello, Brandy. Let's see. Which infection causes strange pitting temporarily in the skin? For instance, the elastic band in the socks, leaving the imprint in the skin for an hour or more. It's a strange symptom, but one that I've noticed on a lot of people in Lyme support group. If I put on a mask, the elastic band will leave a mark on my cheek for hours. Can methylene blue be used topically? So yes, methylene blue can be used topically, but it may be more beneficial at treating topical or skin infection than it necessarily is at getting systemically absorbed. Okay. Number two, tick-borne infections in and of themselves usually don't lead to this, what I call pitting edema, but some of the antibiotics that we have people on can. So for instance, the tetracyclines like doxycycline, tetracycline, minocycline can lead to fluid retention in the skin, and you get a situation like that. Okay. All right. Good luck to you, Randy. Hello, Sharon. Does a bullseye rash occur for anything besides a tick bite? Possible. It's possible. A true bullseye rash we do think is from tick bite, but sometimes spider bites give you red rashes that are circular and have clearing as well too. So it's possible that non-tick-borne bites or non-tick bites can give rashes that have a bullseye appearance. Okay. Hello, Sheldon. Let's say hi, doc. I have a bladder infection which continues to come back because I don't completely empty my bladder. I have been treated with some antibiotics twice. What would you recommend for natural antibiotics? So, Sheldon, one thing that I would do in a situation like this is I want to make sure that I'm limiting the chances of bacteria getting into your bladder. And one of the things that can limit the ability for bacteria, like E. coli bacteria, that often will migrate from the outside, from up into the bladder, is a substance called mannitol, which is a type of sugar. It makes your urethra skin much less sticky and willing to hold on to the E. coli. I cannot remember here right now in this moment how to use mannitol. I haven't used it in a long time, but I'm sure you can look that up. You would just Google mannitol for bladder infection prevention, and it will tell you how to do that, okay? Beyond that, the antiseptic herb that sometimes can be useful for, and I said sometimes, can be useful for a bladder infection is an herb called uva ursi, UVA, and second word URSI. Again, I would have to look up the dosing on that. I don't have that off the top of my head either, okay? All right, good luck to you. All right, everyone, that's it for tonight. And believe it or not, I got through every question. I think we had a smaller turnout tonight, and I'm not quite sure why. I know the number of people that signed up was a little bit lower than typical, and the number of people that showed up tonight was lower than typical. I think it's summertime. I hope people were out having a good time. For those of you that joined me here tonight, I'm glad you were here. I hope you got something useful out of tonight. I'm going to take some time this evening after spending some time with my daughter. I'm having dinner here this evening to go ahead and edit up the video and get it out to you tomorrow. And when I send it out tomorrow, there should be a summary that I'll send along with that of what we discussed tonight. And again, join me and help me to spread the word and to help people. If you would forward that video to anyone you think would benefit tomorrow, that'd be great. I'd appreciate if you do that. I also appreciate if you'd help me by sending out the invitations to others when you get it as well, too. Okay? All right. Good night, everyone. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Bye-bye.